Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered, the podcast exploring what really happens to your identity, ambition, and career when you become a mother. Matrescence is the transition into motherhood, and it's one of the biggest identity shifts a woman will ever go through. Yet, when it comes to our careers, it's still barely understood. So often, motherhood gets framed as something to push through and bounce back from.
We think it's something else entirely, a capability shift, and we think it's time to name it and to talk about it properly. I'm Rose, coach, consultant, and researcher completing a master's in organisational psychology.
And I'm Bianca, a chief marketing officer, pregnant, and living this experience in real time. Each episode, we take one belief about motherhood and work that doesn't hold up under scrutiny and break it down properly.
Using research, lived experience, and honest conversations about what sustainable high performance actually looks like when your identity is shifting.
Welcome to Matrescence Unfiltered. We're really glad you're here. There's a phrase we've all heard 1,000 times. It takes a village to raise a child. And yet nobody tells you that in today's society, you have to build that village yourself, from scratch, while pregnant, while working, often far from where you grew up and the people who know you best.
This episode is about why that matters more than most people realise, not just emotionally, neurologically, practically, and professionally. The research on what happens to women who go through this without adequate community around them is striking, and the research on what changes when they have is even more so.
As someone in their third trimester, I've been building my village. A doula, NCT, the women in my life who have done this before me. And what I've been learning is that this isn't a nice to have. It is one of the highest leverage decisions you can make before your baby arrives. Welcome to our episode on building the village. Rose, I feel like we should kick off with some data on this because the data is stark. Talk to me. What do we know about isolation in pregnancy, the importance of building a village, and why everybody listening to this should care? Okay.
So the NTT did some research and found that in the UK, over half, so 54% of new mothers reported feeling lonely after having a child, making motherhood one of the loneliest experiences in adult life, despite being one of the most universal, the most common. And 1 in 5 women experience perinatal mental health difficulties. So this is depression, anxiety, or both, during pregnancy or in the first year after birth. And what's really interesting about that is Alexandra Sachs. I know we've spoken about her in a previous episode.
Love her.
She's brilliant. She also talks about how if women understood matrescence before they went through it or as they were going through it, that might help with some of these mental health challenges.
Immediately, I start to think to myself, okay, we know all this to be true, and yet the village, as we think about it, is rarely automatic anymore. Previous generations had proximity, right? They had family nearby, stable communities, neighbours who actually made eye contact and knew each other. And that infrastructure for us now, in our generation, has largely completely vanished. The village in today's society isn't something that you have. You have to actively work on it, construct it. And that requires time, money, energy, and a level of privilege that I think we should have a really good conversation about today. In exactly the moment where, in the vulnerability of pregnancy, you actually have the least of all those things, especially if you're talking about energy, resources, and everything else. So, huge conflict there for me. And I have a lot of personal experiences that I can bring into this too already.
I'm excited to get into it. And I think a really important point there as well is like the planning that goes into this. It's not just something that happens and appears. You have to think about it and plan for it. And sometimes that is at a financial cost as well, which I know we'll get into. So yeah, you're right. Everybody says it takes a village, but most women that I speak to don't have one. They've had to build it from scratch. And what came through really clearly is that the village is not one thing. It is a patchwork. It's nursery, a WhatsApp group, an Instagram account they follow. It's an NCT club, a breakfast club, a baby sensory class, a partner who works flexibly, a friend who just gets it. And if any part of that patchwork falls through, the whole thing can wobble and fall apart, which is something I'd really like to discuss today.
Patchwork is the perfect word. That's exactly what I've been living. Let me tell you a little bit about the village that I've been building. So, I have had lots of conversations with women in my life who have been mothers, who've become mothers, who are in it, but very few that are actually pregnant at the same time. And I think this happens a lot, right? You, in an ideal world, would be getting pregnant at the same time as your friends. You'd go through the experience together and you could hold each other's hands through it. It doesn't really work out like that. I will tell you one funny story though. On Instagram, you've got like the Reels tab and then the Friends tab where you can see what content your friends are engaging with. I found out that an old colleague who lives in Dubai was pregnant at the same time as me because we were liking all the same reels.
The algorithm knows.
The algorithm served that up. And that tragically was like the extent of my community because I didn't have anybody else in my life that I knew that was pregnant. So the conversations that you have with mothers who have been through it are so valuable. But to be in conversation with someone who's right there with you is a gift and hard to find. The first experience that I had of that was actually a pregnancy yoga class that I went to. And it was like a £12 class in a village hall. I didn't really know what to expect or how it was going to be. And it was my first time being around other pregnant women. And we had a little conversation at the end around like, what gender are you having if you know? How are you feeling? And those 2 to 3 minutes of discussion did more for me than any Instagram post ever could. So that in person experience, we know neurobiologically that that is so important to be able to be in person, have that sense of like communion, together. So that really helped me.
That connection piece is so important to us as human beings. Like, that is what we are put on this earth for. And loneliness can be as bad as starvation. It impairs your executive function. It impacts your work performance. So if you're not feeling connected to people going through it, I appreciate there's only a few minutes in a pregnancy yoga class, but having those connections that then can go through the developmental shifts with you and with your baby, and you be able to talk to someone who's also in it at the moment, that connection piece is so important.
It completely changed everything for me, Rose, that week. I'd been having a really isolating week. I felt really in my head about a lot of stuff. And being around them, it strengthened me, it fortified me. So that completely speaks to how I felt. And that was a yoga class. Of course, the physical benefits were great, but as you say, the emotional benefits I got from that were beautiful. NCT is something we should talk about because I
Yes.
haven't actually started my NCT classes. I start next week. But we know that a lot of women get a huge amount of value from them. So I'd love to hear what you've heard about it because I have heard it described as an expensive but highly valuable WhatsApp group. What have you heard about NCT so far?
So, NCT, for anyone who doesn't know, it was set up by the National Childbirth Trust, and it is essentially local groups of expecting parents, and they go through the same. Is it an 8-week program?
Depends how you do it. You can do 1 week over 8 weeks, or you can do an intensive course. We're doing an intensive one, which is probably why it's quite close to my due date. So we're
Ah,
doing
so you're
four
doing
evenings.
NCT Pro Max.
We always like the intensive driving course, right? So we're doing 4 evenings and then one whole Saturday.
And I think particularly for people who don't live close to home, they don't have friends and connections nearby who are going through those same developmental milestones and having the baby in the same kind of few month period, these groups are lifelines for some women, and they are genuinely powerful as a support system. But it can also become the first place that you feel judgment of doing something differently. I know people who've remained friends of their NCT group like for 10 years, and their children are still friends. And I think it can be really valuable. But I do think that is also an area where people start to feel that judgment piece as well, which we can get into.
Yes. And it's the classic thing of you and I went to an all girls school. That's where we met. And these relationships and these dynamics can be complicated. And if you're all put together at a vulnerable time where you're already judging yourself more than you typically would, you're already wondering, am I doing this right? Am I okay? Like, was that okay with every decision that you're making? Suddenly to be in that group dynamic, and I will report back on the podcast, can bring up some stuff. I
Oh,
totally
I'm sure. And I think the thing with parenting as well, everybody thinks they're doing it the right way and the best way for their children. And they are. Like you do the best that you have with the information that you have at the time. I do believe that about parenting.
me too.
And I think things that can be different. But I think to judge someone else for doing something differently to you is really unfair because you don't know their circumstances, their support systems around them, their financial situation. So I think having them as support groups where you are open and empathetic to other people's circumstances and situations. And obviously, I'm not a parent, I've not been to NCT, but to remain open and not be competitive. Like, as you said, we went to an all girls school, we've experienced what
We
that can be
know.
like. We know. But like, there is no right, really, truly right way of doing it. You have to figure out a balanced way to do it between you and your partner, or you and your support system, whatever you've got around you, to raise to raise your baby. Understand that everyone's going through their own things. They're all at this really vulnerable stage.
And you mentioned support systems there and groups. NCT has a barrier to entry. It's around 300 to £350 on average. And if you're not in the UK, for
That's quite
context, that's not
expensive.
cheap. It's expensive. And what does that really mean? That means that not everybody can access it, but something that you can access that I've been finding very valuable is the forums. So, Peanut has been a lifeline for me in many ways. On there, you have different groups. So, like, I'm in a group of May 2026 mothers to be, and people are sharing, sometimes anonymously, sometimes with their usernames, symptoms they're experiencing or questions of, is this normal? And as you say, it's not going to give you the in person experience that I got from pregnancy yoga, but it does give you something in those lonely moments when you're having some insomnia and you just want to feel like you're not losing your mind. Definitely helpful.
And just for comparison, what is the kind of price point for entry for Peanut? So if we're talking about NCT being £350 for an 8-week course, what's Peanut's subscription model?
So I have only used the free version. I haven't actually upgraded, and you can, on the free version, connect with local mums, kind of like a Tinder, Hinge,
Yeah, that's how I've heard it described. Hinge for mums.
Hinge for mums, which is pretty cool. And the forum's completely free to access as well. So highly recommend, especially if you want something that feels like a little bit more personal than a mum's net or a Tommy's. I do think if you're in the UK and internationally, it's a great resource. The other thing that I have been experiencing that's been unbelievably helpful to me has been working with a doula. Now,
Okay, before we get into this, I'm sure people are rolling their eyes a little bit when they hear the word doula, because I think it can be a little bit woo woo. So before we get into your experience with a doula, can you explain what a doula is?
of course I can. And I get the eye rolling because I was right there with you before. And I will say that where the need for a doula came from was not having my mum and family nearby,
Okay.
which is often a route to it. But let me explain what a doula is. So, a doula is a trained, non medical professional, although they often have medical backgrounds, like they might have been midwives or nurses in the past, who provides continuous physical, emotional, and informational support before, during, and shortly after childbirth. A doula's goal is to ensure that the person giving birth feels safe, empowered, and supported. And they often assist you with things like comfort measures, advocacy when you are dealing with midwives, and a lot of guidance through this postpartum period. My personal experience of this was that my mum, as I said, is not nearby. She's about 2 hours away, which really, in the grand scheme, isn't very far, especially being of Brazilian descent. Like, my mum did this with her mum in the Southern Hemisphere. So it's not comparable, but still 2 hours away. And she recommended to me, my mum's a psychotherapist and she does believe in like real holistic health and some more woo woo stuff. What
Yep.
about working with a doula? And I remember thinking, this sounds so American, a
It's
doula,
very LA mom, isn't it?
very LA mom, very LA. And I thought, a doula? Seriously? Like, what is this really going to do for me? But as I researched it more and more, I realized, okay, this is backed by real data. So I'll
Mm.
give you a stat here that I think is interesting for us. Women supported by a doula are 39% less likely to have a cesarean birth. Nothing against cesareans. We know how many women are opting for cesareans and they work really well for them. But it's interesting about outcomes. 15% more likely to have a spontaneous vaginal birth and report significantly higher satisfaction with their birth experience. So I think this is about two things. You gain an amazing amount of knowledge and empowerment through like knowledge is power. You gain a lot of knowledge that your midwife appointments simply don't have the resources to get into. And second, a lot of doulas actually attend the birth with you. And that is what I will be doing. I will have my partner and my doula with me at the birth rather than my mum with me. That's a really conscious decision because I want my mum, of course, to meet my baby as soon as possible. But I don't want to worry about the people in the room while I'm going through the most significant moment of my life. And when it came to looking into it, my mum kept saying, "Do you have a doula? Have you found your doula?" And I'm thinking, okay, what is this thing? And I started getting more into it. And I ended up finding a doula local to me. So she's 15 minutes away, which is really reassuring because when I go into labor, I had this big fear of my partner's going to be working an hour away on the train. I'm gonna be probably at home. What will that look like? I may go into labor during the middle of the night, but what if I don't? I don't have any
Mm.
support system around me. So that was the first thing. Then when I had an introductory call with her name's Tracy, she really got into supporting not just me, but us as a couple. And she said, "I won't even start this work without meeting your partner." Because a big
Wow.
part of this role, yeah, interesting, right? A big part of this role is the core village, you two as the villagers in this case, because we don't have a big support system around us, needs to be really strong. And in the birthing experience, in leading up to the birth, so often the man is overlooked and doesn't get that support. And a big part of her role is supporting him so he can support me. And that's about advocacy, that's about giving us both knowledge and a lot of information, and also hypnobirthing, which we could do a whole episode on hypnobirthing, but essentially thinking about how I can have my mindset in as good a place as possible and surrounding me with support and love that I just haven't had. And what it started to feel like as we continued in our sessions, and we ended up having 4 sessions, and we're kind of done now until the birth, but she is on standby at any point for questions that I have, is it started to feel like going back to almost ancestral practice, having a group of like female elders around me, helping me through this,
Yeah,
showing
'cause
me the way.
that was the village.
That was the village. Now, because of how isolated we all are, because of capitalism and loads of other forces at play, we now have to pay for that village.
Mm.
And this is a big point because despite the evidence base of positive birth outcomes due to working with doulas, doulas are really inaccessible for most people. The
Yep.
average cost in the UK of working with a doula can range from 800 to £2,000. So that means that this continuous support is a total privilege rather than a standard. Doula UK, the organisation and the body that brings all doulas together, estimates there are around 1,500 practicing doulas in the UK, but that's nowhere near enough to meet demands, even if cost wasn't such a barrier. So
Wow.
I've been incredibly fortunate to work with a doula. It's not as woo woo as you would think, although it can get there if you want it to be, but it's customed to you. You talk about your fears, you talk about what you're really afraid of in birth. You write a birthing plan, which I'd never thought to do. And it's all
Mm.
about everything from the number of vaginal examinations that you're happy to have and the pros and cons of those to your ideal birth might be in a birthing pool, but if interventions needed and how you want after if you have to have an emergency cesarean, for example, you still want skin to skin. You still want the umbilical cord attached. Things that I just never knew. And she's given me so much information that I could never have got from a book. And she's helped me and she's giving me confidence. So it makes me sad that, well, on one hand, I'm very, very fortunate to get to experience it, but I wish that every woman had this
Yeah.
because your midwife appointments that you have if you're low risk every 2 to 3 weeks at this stage of pregnancy, they barely scratch the surface. We haven't spoken in my midwife appointments yet. We haven't spoken about birth plans yet. I could go into labor from now. 37 weeks is the start of full term. So it just shows you that the doula experience is amazing, but we are paying for our village, and that has been a part of building my village.
Wow, I think it's incredible that you've had such a positive experience. There's a couple of things that you said there that I just want to touch on. So, firstly, her bringing your partner into the conversation. It should be 50-50 where it can be. And I think bringing dad into the equation as a partner in it, not as a side character, is so important. And there's a fertility doctor that I follow called Dr. Federica Amati. And she has the same sort of concept where, yes, she will help mum, but if mum comes to her fertility treatment on her own or the initial consultation, her first question is, where is your partner? Where is the other parent in this? If there is another parent, of course, because it is equally your responsibility. And I think particularly with fertility, dad's fertility is just as important as mum's. So like, again,
Yes.
going back to trimester 0, which we've spoken about before, like women go through, taking folate, looking after their diet, like that is equally as important to men. So I think bringing them along and creating that journey with them also gives them a sense of ownership. I know a lot of men have said that they feel like they have to take a backseat because mum is the she-fault parent, like it always defaults to her. And actually bringing them in and getting them as involved as possible, I think is such a positive experience. So I love that. And then the other piece you said there, which is really important, and I just want to pick up on, and this is absolutely not woo-woo, is the advocacy piece. So you have put together your birth plan, and I know lots of women don't because they're like, sometimes it just goes out the window
What
and
will
I'd rather
be, will
not have
be.
one. Yeah,
Yeah.
what will be. But like understanding what are your boundaries, what you feel comfortable with. So when you're in that really vulnerable state of giving birth and you might not be, fully able to advocate for yourself, that advocacy piece to have someone in the room to say, this is not what she wants. She's, we've spoken about this. I actually don't want you to do an additional examination. Please, can we keep those students out the room? Whatever that might be as part of your birth plan. I think having someone there to advocate for you is so important. Putting that in the context of work, like having someone advocate for you makes you more confident in advocating for yourself. And that, again, as a working mother, will be so important on the other side when you're coming back and returning, which I know we're going to talk about in another episode.
That is really well articulated and advocacy, I would say. Those two things that you've pulled out there are the things that have made the biggest difference to me. The hypnobirthing, the meditations, the affirmations. For example, I have an affirmation that I'm saying to myself every morning when I feel my anxiety stress about giving birth, which is, my body was made to do this. And I like to almost interrupt my brain when I start thinking, I'm looking down at my stomach right now and I'm thinking, how the fuck am I going to get this out of myself?
You are in the 90 percentile of the bump.
I am. My bump is huge. They thought I had gestational diabetes. I get it. But I'm like, how is this coming out? But then I interrupt and I say, my body was made to do this. But beyond that side of things, the two most helpful things, as you've said, have been bringing my partner into it. So I feel less alone. That's the start of our village. And advocacy and knowing that I can actually say, you know what, I don't want my bump measured, for example, in this next midwife appointment. Or, as you say, no students. That's in my birthing plan. No students, please. First time mum. I don't want anyone taking notes. I want as few people in the room as possible. And I think whether you have a doula or not, if you're listening to this and you're preparing for your birth and you're thinking about, like, okay, yes, how can I make it truer to me? Start thinking about yourself as a person. Tracy's really helped me with this. She's helped me with, what do you need as a person? I'm very sensitive to energy. So the fewer interruptions I'm going to have, the better. The dimmer the light is for me, the better. The fewer people around me, because I'm susceptible to energy, like all of these things.
Mm.
You don't need a doula, and you don't need to spend that much money to start to think for yourself, because you have a voice in this. So through this episode, I hope that we can help even one person know that you can advocate for yourself. And sometimes it sucks to have to be your own village. Let's be really honest here.
Mm.
It's such a shame that we're having to pay and outsource and gather support around us in this way. But let this podcast also be part of your village, right? This conversation we're having right here, let this be a part of it, to say you can question things, and how when you are going through matrescence, it can really actually bring up some stuff for you around, can I ask? And you might be, as I am typically, an assertive leader in the workplace who has no issue challenging in meetings at this point in my career. And yet when I get into a medical context, I become almost like a little girl. What is that? That's a whole topic in itself.
Mm.
But I wanted to pause here to talk about, if you can't, as many people can't access a doula, or you don't want to, it doesn't feel quite right for you, there are a few things that I've learned that you can do that could have a similar effect. So I didn't know this, but as part of your NHS midwife care, you can book an appointment with a home birth team, even if you have no intention of birthing at home. For me personally, I know the clinical outcomes of home births are actually really incredible, but I want to give birth in a hospital. But as
Yeah,
part
I'd
of
want
your
to be in a
exploration,
hospital around
yes,
medical professionals.
me too. I need the control. I need access to the drugs if I need them. No judgment from me on that. But even if you have no intention of birthing at home, you actually receive, apparently, better care and continuity of care. And
Oh,
that means that you'll get more information and you'll get more face time with medical professionals who can help you understand your options. So inquire about that at a midwife appointment. It could be interesting. Home birth exploration. Pregnancy yoga, I mentioned, even just going to a couple of classes, it will give you a sense of community. It will make you feel that little bit less alone. And if you're lucky, you might actually meet a mum that you connect with there. You never know.
yeah.
I didn't take the details of the mums that I met, but just being in that 1 hour with them made a big difference to my mental health that week. Another thing you can do is actually a one-off session with a doula. If you want to just to build your village out and have another elder who you just meet once, talk about okay, these are my rights, this is what I'm struggling with, and just have that reassuring voice. There's something in that reassuring elder female who's been through it, who supports women through it, that could just give you some confidence. So that's been a part of building my village. And I hope, does that help you understand the whole doula thing a little bit more, and why it can be helpful?
It does. I understand the advocacy piece is so important, but I hadn't thought about it from also bringing your partner along on that 50-50 journey, which is so important. And a couple of things to add that I think could potentially be helpful in building a village. So, first of all, there are maternity coaches, matrescence coaches. Often you can book of just an introductory chemistry call with the coach first. So you don't actually have to pay to set up any sessions. But if that's something you wanted to do and can afford to do, that can be really helpful. Other things that have been mentioned as part of my research, which have been incredibly helpful, are maternity mentors internally. So if there is someone internally who has been on maternity leave, they obviously it has to be a voluntary. I think if you're in an organization, you expect all women who've had babies to then be mentors. That's not fair. That puts an extra level of pressure on them. But women who want to support other women in the workplace, you could kind of, even if it's informal, if there's no kind of formal maternity mentoring program, just to talk about the practicalities of that, I think can be really helpful. There are often in most organizations, bigger organizations, like a parents and carers. So going to any webinars or calls or sessions or coaching opportunities that I offer can be really, really helpful. The other piece I wanted to mention was the concept of a digital village. So a lot
Mhm.
of women that I've spoken to, because one of the questions in my research is around where could technology help creating sustainable high performance? And helping your well-being. And lots of women spoke about this digital village. So curating your Instagram account so it follows people that help with like sleep tips, who help with putting a birth plan together, that sort of thing. So creating a social media account or curating your feed so it is the stuff that brings you energy and support rather than comparison and judgment, I think is really important there, because obviously that is a piece that comes with social media. So the digital village gives you the information, but it doesn't necessarily give you someone who can hold the baby when you're crying.
I love the digital village. I think that it's really hard to be what you can't see.
Mm.
And having my algorithm quite honestly track me throughout this entire pregnancy, week by week almost, and looking at the comments, and even sometimes just seeing somebody with the same due date can make you feel like your experience is more real. And having even like the right podcasts, access to the right books, it's hard because, I haven't felt like I've had much time to read. And so that's where being able to have a brief conversation. Even I hosted an International Women's Day panel with 3 female leaders in our organization. Just in turn, it was like kind of a lunch and learn thing. And even just hearing our finance director talk about the fact that she never feels like she's doing anything 100% that well, and that it is hard, and the vulnerability in that moment felt like a permission slip for me in that I'm less alone. Even though the conversation wasn't directly between her and I thought, okay, as I travel through this, there are other women who are right there with me, have been here. It's not an isolating experience. So even those like micro interactions that you have, and as you say, it can be online, it can be an exchange of a comment, or I put up my pregnancy announcement post last week and I had people in my DMs so generously offering their numbers, being like, if you want to talk, I've just had a baby. This is how I'm feeling about it. Give me a month or so because I'm like in the thick of it, but let's go for a coffee when we can. Receiving that, being that if you have the capacity, and knowing that it is going to be unconventional for us. I think it's so backed by data that building community during pregnancy, ideally before your 3rd trimester, is one of the highest leverage things that as a woman we can do for our mental health,
Mm.
birth experience, and our return to work. So there's one difficult thing about it that I will say, which is if you are a high achieving woman, you might struggle with asking for help.
Yes.
And that's definitely been the case for
That is
me.
actually something I wanted to get into in this episode, is
Yeah, please.
the importance of asking for help. So most women, if they don't have a village around them, they feel, even if they do have a village around them, they feel that they don't want to ask for help. They should be able to do this on their own. You know, they're highly capable. They've got this. And actually carrying that additional load, the additional stress, the additional pressure has really negative impact on your mental health and leads to burnout, whether that is immediately when baby comes or whether that is 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line when you're trying to return to work and do it all. And this is where that concept of, can you have it all at once? You know, that originally, I actually learned this morning, I was listening to another brilliant podcast, which anyone building a digital village is called Motherkind. And they were talking about that can you have it all concept. And that originally came from a Cosmo editor in like the 1980s. And that wasn't about having a family. That was, can I have a husband and a job? Not can I have a husband,
Oh,
a
wow.
child, and a job. It has created this societal expectation for women to have it all, to girl boss, to bounce back, which are all really toxic terms. And I think what's really important there is asking for help for the people that you trust and connections that you make. Like often people will be wanting to offer you help. I know that I've had friends before who have had babies and you don't want to step on their toes. So you don't know what you don't know. And there was something I read the other day and it was like, unless someone is coming to help me do something, to clean something, or to bring me some food, I'm not having them visit me. If it's something that where I could be napping and sleeping and catching up on my rest, then I don't want that person there.
I am so with you. And I think that We are allowed to feel like society has failed us in the fact that we don't have natural villages anymore.
Mm.
It's very rare that I know anyone who lives in walking distance of their family and everything is going to be built for them and they're going to be held through it. So, my hope is that sharing all of this solidarity with other women can help those outcomes, as we say, backed by data, be more positive. But unfortunately, we have to be intentional about building it.
Yeah.
And it's okay to feel a little bit like, wow, in addition to everything else I'm preparing, I've got to add this to the list too.
Yeah.
So that's on a lifestyle angle. I'm wondering, looking at it organizationally, what does the organizational and leadership psychology literature say about the relationship between social support and sustainable high performance? This idea that the village isn't soft, it's a structural thing. What do we know? What should we know?
Well, if we look at how to create high performance environments, like, people feel that they have a purpose in that organization. No matter what they're doing, they feel like what they're doing is contributing to the overall business goal. They also feel a deep sense of belonging. So they know that they have a team around them. And I personally dislike any kind of family analogy when it comes to work. I like to think of it more of a team. And I don't mean like just your average sports team. I'm thinking about high performing sports teams. It's not just the players, it's not just your Patrick Mahomes as a Kansas City Chief and the rest of the NFL players. It is the coaches, it is the physios, it is the people who are making sure they're fed. It is everything around them that allows them to be high performance. And if you think about that in the context of work, it is people understanding their role in that team, and that connection piece is huge in regards to that sense of belonging, which is what creates high performance.
Yes, belonging is everything. And I've read that women with strong peer support networks during maternity leave report significantly higher confidence upon returning to work. Of course, they do. It makes perfect sense. And community can start as early as trimester 0 as well. We know that being in isolation, we've talked about it with trimester 0, with the first trimester, it can link to increased anxiety and reduce workplace performance. So, my dream would be that there would be more of these networks within the workplace for us to have these conversations. One conversation can give you enough energy and motivation and just belonging, as you say, to embolden you for the month ahead.
We've dismantled every village that used to exist. No extended family on the doorstep, no community infrastructure, nursery hours that don't match your working hours. And then we ask women why they're struggling. And as you said, the village isn't given to you. You have to build it yourself from a WhatsApp group, from your nursery, your NCT, your digital village, a partner who can be flexible. And every piece of that patchwork costs something, whether that's money, whether that's time, whether that's guilt, or whether that's all three. And I think we just need a better understanding that if we had these things more availably in place, as you said, more accessible, women would have, but actually both parents would reap the benefits of it. It would be huge.
You calling it a patchwork actually makes me feel better because that's exactly what I feel I'm doing. And sometimes I can feel sad. Being honest, I can feel sad that it has to be such a patchwork effort, but it is what it is.
Mm.
And I know that this is the norm for us now. And it is a tragedy that we have, as you say, broken down community so severely, and we expect women to act as if nothing has changed. Again, completely conflicting outcomes there. And it's good to talk about it.
One thing I want to say before we finish is the support system conversation is often framed around self care, like mum self care, giving mum space. It's not about that. It's about infrastructure. And until we treat it as infrastructure, we'll keep framing it as a personal problem women need to solve on their own. And that is something that I would love to change.
Me too. And if you are in a leadership role, if you're career focused, if you're going through this, my advice too is to find your examples. Even role models that you might not know personally, get your references, get your examples. Remind yourself that you are not alone, that you can do this. Others that have come before you have done this, and you will be a role model for women that you pass the baton on to.
Yeah, you are
You will.
so capable. And by demonstrating that and setting that example, you don't know how many other women you can help as well. And I think that's so powerful.
Me too. So that feels like a perfect note to end on. But before we do, what do we want to retire? I think for me, and I'd love your thoughts, I would like to retire the cultural assumption that community is meant to materialize naturally, that support will appear when needed, and that the village is something that just is rather than something that is built.
Let's rebrand it as creating that patchwork.
Create the patchwork, build the village. You're not alone in having to build it, and I'm right there with you.
Thank you all for joining us today.
If you've taken something from this episode, we'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend.
We'd also love to hear from you. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And please share your questions, comments, and experiences. This is a conversation we want to build together.
Until next time.